Chapter 1. Belief in fate is statistical ignorance. Defining terms. The word karma finds its uses in both philosophical and theological contexts. Within these contexts, the word karma is associated with rebirth and has roots in many schools of thought, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Taoism. Typically, when people use the word karma in Western cultures, they are not referencing a specific doctrine from India or China. In America, the word karma is often used to quickly articulate longer phrases, such as, "what goes around comes around," or "you reap what you sow," and so on. It's much easier for many people to just say, "that's karma," even though that's not exactly karma. Americans generally take the religion out of the word karma. Still, it's clear that many people believe that there is a supernatural force behind karma. They add some magic or a divine nature to karma by believing that every good deed is repaid to the author of good, one for one, with an equal amount of good eventually. Likewise, every bad deed is repaid to the author of bad with an equal amount of bad eventually. From here forward, when we see the word karma appear in this book, in no way is it a reference to any of the ideologies practiced in India or China. Rather, the word karma, as it will be used in this writing, takes on the Americanized use of the word. The words fate, destiny, and predestination will mean basically the same thing in the coming chapters, but we use all of these words at different times because they each tend to trigger a slightly different image in our brains. For example, the words fate and destiny are often used in the context of romanticism and elicit images of fairy tales, whereas the word predestination is more often used in theological contexts. It wasn't meant to be. Having even the slightest belief in fate hinders nearly every area of our lives, including relationships, work, and health. Having a mindset that constantly gives fate a voice in our lives can cause us to do things like believe that it is our destiny to marry someone simply because of the extraordinary circumstances which led to meeting them. In reality, our personalities may actually be quite unsuitable. On the flip side of this, relying on fate can cause us to miss out on a relationship with a quality person, simply because we have to put in some work. That's not what the fairy tales depicted, so we're quick to assume that it wasn't meant to be, when making a connection takes a little effort. Similarly, we think that the career we wanted wasn't meant to be because our first 4 applications were rejected, but we may have just needed to have tried that 5th time to have succeeded. Or maybe that career truly wasn't the best choice. Either way, we need to examine the facts in a way that is divorced from any notion of superstition or destiny. Believing in destiny can even be bad for our health, causing us to say things like, "I just wasn't made to be thin," or "I inherited bad genes." The reality is that more than half of our genetics are epigenetic, meaning they can be changed. And every year, many people run marathons without any legs at all, never mind 2 good ones that were not made to run. Interestingly enough, it seems the same people were not made to walk either. We're not suggesting that everyone on Earth should take up running as a hobby. The point is that we certainly ought to ask ourselves if the narrative we tell ourselves is hurting us or helping us. Believing in fate can negatively affect our lives by reducing our efforts and by allowing us to pass blame on to fate, God, karma, or some other force for things that are perfectly well within our ability to manage ourselves. Believing in fate gives us a victim mentality and causes us to miss great opportunities for personal growth. The old saying holds true: if you want leaves, rake. If you want diamonds, dig. To find diamonds, you need a shovel. You need to dig. You need to sweat. Giving destiny even the slightest voice can detract from maximum effort. Any detraction, even if it is slight, is an unnecessary sacrifice. Nearly every operation that I was a part of hit roadblocks. Setbacks are sure to come. We don't need more reasons to give up. Some will undoubtedly point out that large-scale accomplishments have been made by people who were motivated by their belief that it was their destiny to fulfill a certain narrative. Genghis Khan, Joan of Arc, religious leaders, and some very wealthy people may have had grand delusions about fulfilling their destinies, but at least they accomplished their goals, right? It is true that high achievers have a characteristic about them which is conducive to achieving goals, but which goals they pursue, the manner by which they achieve their goals, and their level of content after achieving their goals would improve with an accurate understanding of reality. Though it is possible for people to motivate themselves into accomplishing goals by lying to themselves, the result of what they accomplish is rarely healthy for them or the people around them. Self-motivation through dishonest means often brings about more problems than solutions. People who motivate themselves in this manner often lose track of the big picture. They might not realize when it's time to cease the pursuit of their goals. They can sacrifice relationships in pursuit of their goals. They can lose sight of when enough money is enough. They can lie to themselves in order to squeeze out a little extra motivation and not realize when the lies they tell themselves spill over into lying to family and close friends. There have even been numerous times throughout history when someone or a group of people orchestrated the killing of hundreds of thousands or millions of people in order to create their idea of unity in the world. Therefore, the goal that one of these high achievers choose is not as trivial a matter as one might think. The intention of this chapter is not to convince the reader that no form of destiny is possible. Rather, the goal for us is to question the logic and motivation behind believing in destiny, and come to understand that the mere belief in destiny can do our lives more harm than good. What's the motive? Where does our desire to believe in fate come from? Why do we prefer a world in which something like fate exists? There are actually many reasons. For one, there is obviously more comfort involved in believing in fate. Believing in fate relieves us of a degree of accountability and responsibility. We can't be blamed by others for things that are outside of our control, nor can we blame ourselves. Or so we think. Yes, believing in fate subconsciously takes a little portion of everything and removes it from our control. Therefore, predestination and fate are comfortable positions. If my actions won't change it, I have a reason to not try as hard, or not try again after failing multiple times, or to not face the possibility of embarrassment. Indeed, nearly everyone we talk to will say that they believe in fate, karma, or some form of predestination, and dogmatically so. When asked why we believe in these things, we refer to a few events in our lives that seemingly involved too much coincidence to be random. While doing so, we overlook the hundreds of thousands of instances that involve no coincidence at all, but amounted to enormous changes in our lives. We also overlook the events that involve many coincidences yet amounted to, seemingly, nothing at all. The way we gather information is incredibly biased, but it sort of needs to be. We just can't remember everything about everything, especially since 99% of the time our lives are relatively uneventful. Therefore, it makes sense that we overlook the 99 times that prove nothing in regards to fate or God, but remember the one time this month or this year that seems to suggest fate or God or karma are real. Imagine a bus containing 50 passengers crashes, killing everyone on board except 2 people. The families of 48 people will recognize this as an enormous tragedy, whereas the family of the 2 survivors will say it's a miracle from God. Let's think of some good things that have happened to us in our lives and ask ourselves 2 questions. 1. Are the stories leading up to some of those good events sometimes interesting stories, and other times not interesting at all? And 2, are we more likely to remember the interesting events within the interesting stories, or the uninteresting events within the uninteresting stories? The truth is, we are obviously more likely to remember interesting events, involving amazing coincidence over the ordinary, routine, uninteresting events in our lives. Some call this flashbulb memory. We don't use the uneventful moments as evidence to support our case for the existence of destiny, even though the percentage of uninteresting stories in our lives far outweigh the moments involving spectacular coincidence. As a result of this obvious truism, we are taught to believe that, coincidence or not, all life events are fate. That way, we conveniently avoid confronting fate's shortcomings in logic. Rest assured, we will attempt to confront logic today. Those who believe in fate nearly always claim that fate requires no coincidence or interesting events to occur in order to accomplish what it has predetermined will transpire. This presents us with a clear contradiction. If both the interesting and the uninteresting events in our life are examples of fate, then the interesting stories involving coincidence that we use to prove the existence of fate actually prove nothing, seeing as the rules of fate dictate that everything is fate, whether or not a story contains coincidence or is interesting or not interesting. Therefore, the proponents of fate refute the evidence that people most often use to support it. Additionally, for karma to exist, destiny, the way we view it, cannot also exist at the same time and in the same relationship. The 2 views are mutually exclusive. Yet, somehow, just about everyone who believes in fate believes in karma. The idea behind karma is that our actions change the future. The idea behind fate or destiny is that we have a predetermined life. The events within our lives were known and will transpire regardless of our effort. Otherwise, believing destiny means that you believe in essentially nothing. If everything and anything changes the events of our lives, that's not fate. That's just life. Therefore, karma is nearly the opposite of destiny. When we do wrong, we say that karma will catch up to us. When we have the option to do something good for someone, or to not do anything at all, but choose to do good, we say that karma will repay us with good. Let's take a moment to acknowledge that there are many subtle ways in which karma can, in fact, play out in a very real way. For one thing, if you're an arsehole, lie, cheat, or don't treat people well, how long will people do business with you? Naturally, people will only tolerate so much of a person until they've had enough. But people who are enjoyable to be around and conduct themselves in good form are more likely to maintain good relationships with others, as well as reduce the amount of career-related problems they experience. Yes, it can certainly be that doing bad things to others will bring about more bad things in your life, but this should be common sense. We don't need the fairy dust for any of that to be true. What's more is that moods are contagious. Everyone has experienced times when they've taken on what we call the positive energy, negative energy, good vibes or bad vibes from others we're around. This, too, is not magical in any way. We will soon dive deeper into this topic. Eventually, we will turn fate and karma into a mathematical equation to help illustrate how they operate with the same rules and outcomes as those of random chance. Let us put our guard down, open our minds, and question the things we were taught to believe. Time doesn't matter. Obviously, bad actions often have bad consequences. But we can all think of times when someone did what we perceived as wrong and nothing bad happened to them. This is when people are quick to point out that karma is not so simple. They say that when a person does something that hurts us, karma might not repay them for their bad deeds by something directly related to what they did to us. And they might not even be repaid for their bad actions immediately. It could take months or years, they say. Recently, a friend was telling me a story about an ex-boyfriend of hers, who she believed wronged her. "That's okay," she said. "I fully believe in karma. I've seen it. If it doesn't come back to him now, it will come back to him eventually." Obviously, if we wait long enough, something bad will happen to her ex-boyfriend. Let's assume her ex-boyfriend lives to be 80 years old. What are the odds that this 28-year-old man will eventually have something bad happen to him at some point in his life? There is a 100% chance that eventually something bad will happen to him, as well as to everyone else in the world. Of course, a person who wronged you will eventually have something bad happen to them. That's life. And, by the way, when bad things happen to good people, isn't that exactly what people say? Hey, that's life. It is interesting to note that many of the same people who dogmatically believe in karma say things like, "Life's not fair," and "If there is a God, then why do bad things happen to good people?" Or, "Why do children suffer?" These are incredibly common questions that directly contradict our belief in karma and balance in the universe. Yet, the same questions are conveniently forgotten when they don't support our bias, which seems to favor fate, destiny, and karma. The good. So far, we've gone over karma in regards to assholes. But what can be said about good behavior? Within typical human behavior exists what is called the law of reciprocity. Salespersons often use this knowledge in their business practices. When you do something for someone, the recipient of your favor often feels uncomfortable until they have done something for you in return. It can be incredibly beneficial to understand that the law of reciprocity is active in many areas of life and is not exclusive to gift giving and sales. Take relationships, for example. One technique mentioned in Dr. David Burns's book, Feeling Good Together, is what he calls disarming. The disarming technique goes like this. When someone is mad at you for something, take their side. Imagine you are them. Say how they feel and validate their feelings by explaining why they feel the way they feel. In my experience, 100% of the time I've done this, the person I was speaking to completely changed their tone, apologized, and reciprocated by offering me some amount of self-inflection, saying something like, "I'm sorry I got upset. I also was not fair with you, and I should have taken the time to listen to you." If you are reluctant to believe that this works, try it. If it doesn't work, you probably did it insincerely or added some sarcasm or attitude when stating the other person's feelings. The law of averages. Indeed, the law of reciprocity can be recognized in many areas of life. It is perfectly reasonable that goodness begets more goodness, generally speaking. If your good deed does not directly solicit another good event coming back to you immediately, obviously something good will happen to you eventually in your life, provided you wait long enough. It's not magic. It's not karma. It's the law of averages. Those are just the odds. Sometimes good comes to us undeservedly. Other times it comes to us as a direct result of something we did. Just like the fact that if you wait long enough, something bad will happen to you. If you wait long enough, something good will happen to you. It's that simple. What are the odds that a person would live the rest of their life, another 20, 40, or 90 years, without a single good thing happening to them? Those who subscribe to the contemporary Americanized form of karma are basically saying that if you do good to yourself and to others, good will often result, eventually. So, what kind of rule for a belief system is that? Newsflash, that's life. Believing that good will sometime come to you simply describes the obvious result of being nice versus being an asshole. You can check your crystal ball at the door. If you are giving, eventually you will receive something back from some people. There's no revelation or belief system to be had there. It's like making an ideology out of saying, if you don't drink water long enough, you'll be thirsty. What a waste of time. Of course, it goes without saying that getting stuff shouldn't be the reason we're nice to people. We are simply making the point that the occasional reciprocation is an obvious, magic-free byproduct of treating people well. Expecting reciprocation is self-seeking, and believing we deserve every good thing we receive because of karma is narcissistic. Not everything is exactly balanced in life. Sometimes people will take advantage of kindness. However, this too should not be a reason to change our behavior and become meaner or nicer, nor should it be a reason to believe in or not believe in something. It's just life. And yes, those who take advantage of you will have something bad happen to them at some point in their life, directly or indirectly related to the incident which involved you, eventually. How many caveats can we add before an ideology becomes, frankly, not a very good one? We don't need to attach some form of mysticism or religion to otherwise obvious truths of life, or to the law of averages. Statistics and coincidence. Do you have the imagination to momentarily put yourself in a theoretical world in which random chance exists without a supernatural form of karma? If so, then imagine what that world would look like. How would things operate? Now ask yourself this. Within that world, what would the percentage of good things happening to good people and bad things happening to bad people be when compared to a world in which karma did have some magic or supernatural element attached to it? Before we continue, write that number down and save it for later. My next-door neighbour, a single guy who lived alone, had 2 cars. One of which was an old, broken-down, rusty car with 2 flat tyres in the street next to my house. I had moved into my house about 7 months prior, and the car had been there since the time I moved in. In my vanity, I found the busted-up car to be a little embarrassing in that it made the neighbourhood look a little dumpy. My neighbour was a real nice guy, and I always enjoyed our conversations. Despite this, I found myself not so disappointed when, one day, he told me that his landlord had sold the house he was living in, and he would need to move out. 1 month later, he was gone. Shortly thereafter, my new neighbours moved in. Everything seemed fine at first. Then, after about a week, I don't even know how they did it, I came home to a broken, rusty white car missing a rear bumper, with 2 flat tyres next to my house. They must have had it towed and dropped off while I was at work. I told my friend this story. "That's karma," she said. She believed it was karma getting back at me for not being more sympathetic about my previous neighbor needing to move. She's correct that I should have been more sympathetic, but for us to use this as an example in support of the existence of karma, we would need to ignore that I moved 11 times in 11 years without any memorable events involving coincidence related to my living situation. Therefore, this is a better example of the reality that the events in our lives involving coincidence are more memorable experiences. There is a study that has been conducted a number of times. Ask 1,000 people to flip a coin 10 times and call it heads or tails in the air each time. Each time this study is done, someone will call the coin toss correctly at all 10 times in a row. As you might imagine, every time this study is conducted, the person who calls all 10 tosses correctly is tempted to believe that they are incredibly lucky, or gifted, or both. 10 coincidences in a row seem far too many coincidences to be mere coincidence. Therefore, it would be very easy for many people to believe that something mystical was at foot. If all one knew about the situation was that their friend called a coin toss 10 times was correct all 10 times, they might be tempted to take this friend to Vegas or down to the nearest convenience store to buy a lottery ticket. But those are just the odds that play out every time. Have the same lucky friend participate in the same study again, and they will have a completely different outcome. Regardless, some would still explain away the loss by saying that their friend's lucky streak just ended. If you want to find a person who can call heads or tails correctly 20 times in a row, what do you suppose you would need to do? Simply increase the number of participants from 1,000 to 5,000. That's it. Of course, the number of participants you would need in order to find someone who calls heads or tails correctly 20 times in a row would vary from one study to the next, but you get the idea. It really is that simple. Just increase the number of participants until, eventually, you get someone who is correct 20 coin tosses in a row. In fact, the law of averages is so reliable that many multi-billion-dollar businesses, such as those related to sports betting, sales, cold calling, and so on, are modeled around statistics and the law of averages. Those who run these companies did not wake up one day and decide to cross their fingers. They learned the necessary statistics for their business, studied the law of averages, and formed a working business model. So, what does all this mean? It means that, in life, encountering amazing coincidences is a statistical certainty. That's right. Karma and fate share the same statistical likelihood as sheer coincidence. You can bet on that. Still, we can imagine our subconscious saying, but coincidence is still so interesting. There must be some magic to it. There just has to be. Unfortunately, we're so desperate to believe in fate and karma that it needs to be stated. If there is a topic in which there are two views and one view is correct and the other is wrong, it makes sense to believe the view that has more evidence to support it, right? The number of times that karma does not come back around could be 9,999 to 1, but we would still be inclined to favor the 1 because that one time supports our bias, whereas the 9,999 other instances do not. Matt. My first job was working as a patient escort tech in Christiana Hospital in Christiana, Delaware. It was there that I met someone about my age named Matt, a student at the University of Delaware. After working at the hospital for a couple of years, another friend of mine, Jesse, convinced me to quit and move to the beach. "It'll be great," he said. "We'll bartend, make tons of money, meet loads of chicks, and party every day." I'm usually quick to say that it did not work out like that. But to be honest, the reality wasn't too far from that description. The biggest problem was that in a northern state, the on-season is short-lived, and young, naive partiers need a plan B in about 3 quick months. The first job I found in Dewey Beach, Delaware, was at Venus, a fine dining restaurant from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. and a nightclub from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. My first day on the job, I strolled into the kitchen where I was pleased to see a familiar face. Matt Lesniak from Christiana Hospital. "Wow, dude, you not only quit the hospital and moved to the beach, but you got a job at the same place as me," I asked. What were the odds? One has to wonder. Summer ended. It was back to college for Matt, and on to a year-round, cheesy franchise restaurant for me. I made enough to pay the bills over the winter, but nowhere near what I made at the club/restaurant in the summer. So, when the next summer season was nearing, I applied like crazy to the busiest, most popular places, finally landing a job at a different restaurant than the summer before. The first day on the job, I was cleaning some tables, preparing for the dinner rush, when in walked Matt, wearing the same shirt with the restaurant logo that I was wearing. For Matt, this would mean that he unknowingly had gotten a job at 3 different places in a row working with me. My takeaway was that twice could be a coincidence, but 3 times is for sure. It had to mean that something would happen involving Matt and me. Most of the restaurant staff formed one large group of friends. Almost every night, we went out and partied together. Almost every day, we slept in and went to the beach together. Eventually, we formed the area's worst volleyball team. Not surprising, seeing as we showed up late and drunk to every game, and never had the discipline to organize a single practice. After the summer ended, we all went our separate ways. A few months went by. One day, I received a phone call. Matt had gone back to college and committed suicide one evening by shooting himself in the head due to problems with his girlfriend. Dallas Airport. A couple of years later, still living in Delaware, I flew to Pensacola, Florida, to visit my mum in Alabama, where she had moved about 4 years prior. After our visit, I got on a plane that was supposed to take me back to Delaware. For whatever reason, I don't remember why the flight to Delaware was cancelled. The only way back to Delaware was to fly from Florida to Houston, then fly from Houston to North Carolina, then from North Carolina to Delaware. So off to Houston I went. A 5-hour layover in Houston gave me time to walk around, eat, and buy things. Buying souvenirs being one of my favourite things to do. While in line at a souvenir store, I overheard the girl in front of me talking with the woman working the register. The girl in line in front of me, an attractive young girl about my age, was trying to buy a pair of inexpensive earbuds for the plane. The checkout lady said, "No, that price was for a different brand, but we ran out of those. The earbuds you have are $26. The girl was $10 short. I reached into my pocket, took out a $10 note, and handed it to the girl. At the time, the airline I was travelling on did not give out earbuds. You've got to have your earbuds for the plane. I can't imagine how bored I'd be without mine, I thought. After I insisted multiple times, the girl reluctantly accepted the $10, seeming equal parts grateful and embarrassed. I've never been one to flirt with or hit on girls. I always just assumed they have better things to do than be bothered by another creep. Plus, pretty girls get enough attention. I forked over the $10 and quickly walked away. My connecting flight was clear on the other side of the airport, and there was still more I wanted to see. A few hours later, my plane was finally boarding. I got on, sat down, put in my trusty earbuds, fastened my safety belt, and put my head back. After a few minutes, I sensed someone stepping over me. It was the girl from the souvenir store to whom I had given the $10. Houston is by no means a small airport. I couldn't believe that I would have an encounter like that with someone on the other side of the airport, then find that we had been assigned seats right next to each other on the same flight. Not only that, but we also both had the same final destination. She lived only about 45 minutes from where I lived in Delaware. It must be fate, right? Conclusion. On the other side of the amazing coincidences that we experience in life are these super interesting data that don't amount to much of anything, as we saw in the case with Matt Lesniak and the girl on the plane in Dallas. It appears the story with Matt should have had a different ending. One may have expected Matt and I to have gone off to have had some significant life experiences together, like starting a huge successful company or traveling the world, building wells for small villages. But no, I never heard his name mentioned again. As for the girl on the plane in Dallas, I neither saw nor heard from her again after that day. We even exchanged phone numbers. I texted. She didn't respond. It seems as though that story should have ended with us having a long, fulfilling life together, maybe holding hands, walking down a beach somewhere, or climbing to the top of some mountain where we take the perfect photo together. But nope, nothing at all. On the other hand, perhaps it's a good thing we never dated. After all, she could have turned out to be a total train wreck. We'll never know. The Flight 752 equation. A friend of mine was a flight attendant for Ukrainian International Airlines. On the 8th of January 2020, UIA Flight 752, traveling from Tehran to Kiev, was shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile. Iran initially denied having shot down the plane, but after an investigation by Western intelligence agencies made the allegations difficult to deny, Iran later admitted to the missile strike and claimed that the airliner had been mistaken for an incoming cruise missile. Whatever the reason, all 176 people on board Flight 752 that day lost their lives. My friend, however, was not one of them. She claims that her friend Mary was supposed to be a crew member on board Flight 752, but had called out sick, unknowingly escaping the tragedy on that 8th day of January. It was fate that she was sick, my friend said. It certainly seems so. However, one can't help but to think that if the idea is that fate is working in a physical way to cause only what is good in our lives, why is everyone not living in paradise? Seeing as the incident had taken place just a few days ago, it was likely still a sensitive subject, so I didn't want to stir up a conversation about philosophy. Don't do it, Jonathan. After a moment of pondering her statement about fate, I relinquished my better judgment, which was urging me to hold back the question on the tip of my tongue. In as innocent a tone of voice I could muster, I asked, "What about the 176 other people who got on the plane and died? Does fate not work for them?" She responded, "It does. It was their fate as well." So far, so good. I hadn't poked the bear yet. Maybe she would permit me to form a few more thoughts regarding the role of fate and karma in this context. Initially, in our conversation about the Ukrainian Airlines plane crash, my friend told me that two factors led to good happening to Mary, the flight attendant who called out sick. My friend concluded that this event represented evidence that supports the existence of fate, because Mary's outcome was good. Mary became sick. That caused her to miss work, and she did not die. The event involved both coincidence and a positive outcome for Mary. To my friend, this meant that fate was real. Clearly, a sequence of events led to Mary not getting on that plane, and in my friend's mind, some amount of coincidence is indicative of fate. But according to my friend, 176 people also experienced fate that day. Did the 176 people on Flight 752 not experience any sequence of events prior to their boarding Flight 752? And just how rare of an event is a flight attendant calling out of work? One study, consisting of 822 flight crew members, showed that nearly 40% of flight crew call out sick for periods over 7 days each year, and the average number of sick days per crew member in a calendar year is about 24, not including vacation, so missing work is hardly uncommon in the airline industry. My friend believed that everyone involved in the Flight 752 incident experienced fate. One person, Mary, got sick, did not get on the plane, and by some coincidence, did not die. But according to my friend, 176 other people did not experience a coincidence, had a rather inconsequential day, yet they apparently experienced just as much fate as Mary. This infers that coincidence, or a lack thereof, is not indicative of fate at work here. Was Mary getting sick a sign of fate in some way? It should be reasonable to assume that out of the 176 people on board Flight 752, someone was sick, but they got on the plane and died, which, according to my friend, was their fate. Or perhaps the inference is that a positive outcome is indicative of fate. Except that wouldn't make any sense in this situation, because apparently it was 176 people's fate to die. Often, when someone receives bad news from a friend, such as, "I lost money," or "I lost my job," they will respond by saying something like, "But everything happens for a reason." In fact, that's precisely what the insurance agent told me over the phone when I called to cancel my homeowner's insurance policy on a house I was buying after our deal didn't go through. "But everything happens for a reason," she said. I appreciated her kind words. She clearly just wanted to offer me some consolation, but I actually wasn't too upset anyway. But, just for fun, let's think about her words. The idea that everything happens for a reason often seems to suggest that things will work out for good. Otherwise, it would have sufficed to have just said, "That sucks." After all, it isn't more likely that people are telling us that everything happens for a reason so that we can feel worse, right? Positive reframing, or finding the silver lining in what is usually a bad situation, can certainly be beneficial. But it is something that can be practiced all the same without magic or a belief in fate. All bad situations have a silver lining. Perhaps it has the potential to be a learning experience, but that doesn't mean that the bad is indicative of anything that is to come. Some bad things lead to good things, and some bad things lead to more bad things. The statement that everything happens for a reason is a big nothing burger. It's a waste of breath unless it's suggesting a general life direction. Assuming it is favoring a particular direction, which direction does this statement and statements like it favor? A positive one? A negative one? Or something in the middle? If fate favors a particular direction for us, finding our true love, ultimately getting the career we were made for, or any of the other areas of life we attach to fate, then fate can only be true if sometimes fate works, and other times it does not work, because not everything ends up good for everyone, as was evident for the passengers of Flight 752. Again, if everything worked out for good, everyone would be living in paradise. So we must conclude that fate does not favor any particular direction in terms of good and bad. Another common saying is, "It'll all work out." The problem is, it doesn't always work out. And if it is true that fate sometimes works out to benefit us and sometimes does not, then we've been served another nothing burger. Life is apparently a toss-up. This is the exact opposite of fate. Within my friend's statement about those who died on Flight 752, it was their fate as well, we can deduce that what she actually believes is that we live in a world in which sometimes things work out for good and sometimes they don't. The same proponents that her mind used to support her belief in destiny, Mary not dying, were ignored when her mind worked through evidence that would support the idea that destiny was at work in the lives of those who died. So, if destiny sometimes works out for good and sometimes works out for bad, this will mean that focusing any attention on fate is a complete waste of time. Seeing as an event that involves coincidence or irony does not indicate which direction life will take, neither good nor bad. In summary, so far, we've learned that destiny has no time frame for when events occur and no direction, neither good nor bad. Let's continue. Percentages. Earlier, the question was asked, do you have the imagination to momentarily put yourself in a theoretical world in which random chance exists without any type of fate or destiny whatsoever? What would that look like? How would events transpire? How often would we come across an interesting coincidence? In a world absent of any type of fate, if 1,000 people flipped a coin and called it heads or tails in the air, how many people would be right all 10 times? How often would you bump into someone you weren't expecting to see? What percentage of events in our life would involve coincidence? We are told that all events in our lives, good or bad, are destiny. So, think of a number that represents all events in your life: big, small, good, and bad. What is the percentage of times that those events involved some wild coincidence? 1%? 2%? 55%? When we put a number to the percentage of times in our lives involving coincidence, in a world where destiny and karma exist, and compare that number to the number we suppose we would get in a world of complete randomness, one should see how silly it is to be certain that the percentages are any different. Admittedly, none of this proves anything, but that's kind of the point. None of the proponents of fate mean anything. If being sick and calling out of work caused good things for one person and bad things for another person, and both cases are to be considered evidence that supports the existence of fate, then being sick and calling out is not indicative of any particular outcome, and are thereby evidence of nothing at all. Neither the process nor the outcome of anything in a world of fate proves anything different than what we would get had we believed in complete randomness. The proponents of fate are like stating that 2 plus 2 could equal 4 or 7 or 3 or 11. If one were to write out the proponents necessary to subscribe to a belief in fate, on paper it would look something like an aerial photograph of plane crash debris. Another thing worth noting is that the exact number of times karma comes back around in proportion to what it balances out is not an important figure to most people. Do the believers in fate and karma think that the exact proportion of good things and bad things that happen to them throughout their lives is 50-50? Probably not. For example, if you die at age 85, looking back, did you have 133,527 good things happen to you in your life, and 133,527 bad things? Most people will answer no to that question, but they also believe that the exact proportion of good and bad events does not need to be 50-50 in order for karma to work. Order, sequence, polka dots, bubbles. Does the order of events matter? Oftentimes, when I do something good, the very next thing to happen to me might be bad. For example, imagine I'm desperate to go home after work, but notice a co-worker struggling with a dead car battery in the parking lot and agree to help jumpstart their car. After getting their car started, we part ways. But while on my way home, I run over a nail and get a flat tire. I could say, see, karma is not real. But those who believe in karma will say that karma will come back around to me eventually, just not today. This means that karma can skip a step. You might do something bad, but then 2 good things will happen to you. Then 1 bad thing. Then 1 good thing. Then 3 bad things. So karma does not have any particular sequence that it follows. It's seemingly random. As you recall, most who believe in karma say that the time frame doesn't matter. If I do something good, when will karma repay me? Will something good happen to me immediately after? Or will it take a few months or even years? How about when I hurt someone? When will the karma monster come get me? Summary. Fate and karma have no particular direction, good or bad, no time frame, no measurable quantity or percentage, and no particular sequence. All of this information suggests one thing. The proponents of fate and random are exactly the same. If one were to clearly define the working rules of fate, the definition would read identical to the definition of random chance, as the sum of destiny and random chance share the same algebraic expression. Anything can equal anything, without any measurable pattern. So, the proponents of destiny that we're left with now go something like this. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes they don't. We can't know which way a situation will go. The good and bad events in our lives don't have any particular order. The percentage of good things in our lives compared to bad things isn't important, doesn't follow any particular pattern, and our input can change the outcome of our future. If a person were to walk by and read that last paragraph without any context, they might think that they were reading a description of random chance. Fate and karma require no particular direction, no particular time frame, no particular order or sequence, no particular size, scale, or type of event, neither good nor bad. Our input changes the future. Those who do not believe in destiny believe that sometimes things work out in our favor and sometimes they don't. They believe they don't know for sure when things will work out or when they will not work out, but they believe that our actions have some sort of effect on our future. Apparently, this is also the new definition of fate and karma. As we saw in the story of Matt and the girl on the plane in Dallas, sometimes extraordinary things come about through extraordinary means. Sometimes extraordinary things come about through subtle, uninteresting events. And sometimes a series of extraordinary events take place and not much results from it. Therefore, if we believe in fate, we're still confronted with the same logic that those who do not are faced with. Sometimes a result comes about in a dramatic way through a series of entertaining coincidences, and sometimes a result comes about inconspicuously, subtly, without any attention or drama at all. Let us take this question seriously. What is the motivation behind our desire to believe in destiny? We like to believe in fate because we think that there are more possibilities to live with a degree of hope in all circumstances. However, not believing in fate can actually be much more liberating and provide more hope, because believing that the level of effort we put out has a direct connection to an outcome will vastly increase our chances of attaining our goals and improve our quality of life.